So I wait for the ending words.
Need a search engine optimization SEO services? Then get in touch with our professional and friendly team to learn more about our range of custom and tailored services designed to suit your exact needs. Every one of our professionals have acquired years of experience, which ensures you get the very best. Our experienced staff is waiting to hear from you and to answer any specific questions that you may have on how we can meet your needs. Just ask for a consultation and let us prove our commitment to you as we promise to maintain the highest level of quality and commitment. Your satisfaction is our prime concern. So please, don't hesitate to get in contact with us and let us show you all the great options we have.
And we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Radio Network at coalitionradionetwork.com, facebook.com/the Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at coalition_radio, and of course, the mothership now at coalitionradionetwork.com, and of course our older website at coalitionradio.us, where you can find 7 years of broadcasts about what I love to refer to as third rail politics, civil rights legislation, civil liberties, the rights and the freedoms of sex work and the decriminalization of said, the battle against the war on drugs, libertarian politics, freedom politics, all in a family-friendly outrage porn setting. Folks, one of the beauties of this show, this platform, this presentation, is that I get to meet a lot of really interesting people, and it's brought me to engage with a variety of think tanks, thought-provoking organizations, democracy labs, really across the country. And they, in turn, grace us by joining us on our show on a routine basis. Last night we had folks from FIRE on, the preeminent free speech civil rights organization for colleges and universities. Tonight, an organization who now officially achieves what we call a frequent offender status. I'm joined by, for the very first time, Jason Pye. He is with FreedomWorks. Let me read to you just a little bit about the mission statement of FreedomWorks. The mission of FreedomWorks is to build, educate, and mobilize the largest network of activists advocating the principles of smaller government, lower taxes, free markets, personal liberty, and the rule of law. Jason joins us. He is the Vice President of Legislative Affairs for FreedomWorks. Full disclosure, about a year or so ago, really one of the great 3 or 4 days of my life. I joined FreedomWorks, full disclosure, at their expense, at their Washington, D.C. headquarters, and attended 2+ days of training on free market implications of government price controls on prescription medication. The training, if you will, the classwork was intense, but it was thoughtful, and it took a challenging issue on a technical perspective and made it highly accessible for the average activist. Then, in one of more fun than you can ever imagine, and folks who know me will understand this, we spent a day traipsing, cavorting around Capitol Hill, engaging in a variety of friendly and somewhat terrorized staff members at congressmen's offices up and down the row. But we engaged and we had honest conversations about the dangers, regardless of which bipartisan effort it represented, the exigent dangers of using price controls, no matter how attractive, no matter how enticing, on prescription medication. And that's the first time I had the opportunity to engage in them. We've had Dan Zivix on the show since then. But Jason, welcome for the very first time to the Coalition Radio.
Pat, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's just an outstanding organization. What's interesting about FreedomWorks is the time and effort and expense, quite frankly, they go to empower the individual activist. Folks are invited from around the country, spend a couple days, really bone up on an issue. A variety of speakers are brought in. It's sort of a blitz, if you will. You're the first day, your head's a little bit spinning with all the facts, but again, you're operating in an environment where facts matter. we have some discussions, and then we're brought by staff members up on Capitol Hill. It's really an outstanding approach to democratizing information, which typically is kind of bottled up at the K Street level, if you will, around D.C. or in the halls of Congress. So again, it's congratulations on your continuing efforts. What was the birth of FreedomWorks? How did it get started? What brought folks together?
Well, I mean, I've only been at FreedomWorks now for about 5.5 years. So the history of the organization is a little fuzzy to me. I know it started as Citizens for a Sound Economy back in 1984. Mm-hmm. And then around 2003, 2004, Citizens for a Sound Economy kind of split off. And from that, two separate groups formed, Americans for Prosperity and FreedomWorks. So Dick Armey and Matt Kibbe started FreedomWorks as the branch off from Citizens for a Sound Economy. And Kibbe was there until about 2015, about the summer of 2015, and then Adam Brandon, who was the executive vice president of FreedomWorks, he's the person who's responsible for hiring me. He took over the ship about summer of 2015. Has been running it ever since. So yeah, hopefully I didn't butcher the history too much there, but that's I haven't really spent a lot of time on that. My role has progressively changed since I joined FreedomWorks in September 2014. I started out just kind of doing random policy work, mostly focused on criminal justice, some healthcare. And next thing I know, I was director of communications. The next thing I know, I'm the director of public policy and legislative affairs. And the next thing I know, I'm the vice president of legislative affairs. So, and that's happened over the course of about 5.5 years. So my role has steadily grown and changed rapidly.
Has the organization, since it split off, always focused on training and empowering and I'll even use the term weaponizing with a smile, individual activists, because they just do an outstanding job of that?
Well, thank you. And yeah, I mean, that's since, as far as I can remember, and to be clear, Pat, I was an activist of FreedomWorks before I became an employee of FreedomWorks. Mm-hmm. So back in 2010, I think maybe 2011, I started going to a series of events they had called BlogCon. And we would go and they'd fly us in and basically just do trainings for us, how to better improve search engine optimization, how to better run our Twitter accounts, just a series of things that we could all learn from. And you kind of grow our audiences as well as better connect with other bloggers across the country. That was my first interactions with FreedomWorks. And I still have great friends from those initial events. And now, today we still have the grassroots fly-ins, and look, those grassroots fly-ins are good for you guys because we educate you, we train you. Like you mentioned, the price controls fly-in. We've done other fly-ins as well as various issues. But those events are also really good for us because DC, especially dealing with Congress, and I'm sure I can appreciate this as a libertarian, so I'm sure you can appreciate it as a libertarian. You lose a lot. And it gets a little frustrating. And so it's good for our staff to kind of have those interactions with the activists who come into town because we form friendships with them and communication with them. I communicate pretty regularly with some of our activists and just talk to them about what's they ask questions about issues at home, in their home states, or they ask issues about legislation pending before Congress. And we always happily answer those questions. And so we get a lot out of it when you guys come to town. I know you guys get a lot out of it, as you were saying, because of the trainings and because of the education we provide, taking you on the Hill to meet members and staff. But we get a lot out of it too. It really reinvigorates a lot of us, or all of us, because we respond to you guys the way you guys respond to us. So that's helpful for us. Well,
there's a genuine camaraderie there. I mean, the challenge in America today is that the greater culture does not embrace small government. It does not embrace, ironically, the individual liberties that were really the hallmark of this nation's founding. We, as a libertarian, we often talk about respecting the rights of the ultimate minority, the individual. The individual nowadays is seen as someone who's, while in the past they might be considered disruptors, innovators, entrepreneurs, that rough and tumble American individualist was celebrated in the culture. Nowadays, an individual is seen as someone who is complacent, except when it comes to they're seen as greedy, except when it comes to their own rights. It's really taken on a negative, a pejorative term, and that's disappointing. So when you get together with a group of folks of similar mind, and you get to actually engage with them, perhaps, and particularly subject matter experts of the which type which you employ, it's fun. There's camaraderie, but it's also ennobling because you all of a sudden take a moment, see the sunshine, get a chance to refocus on the real cause, and when you leave, you're on fire. You're ready to roll, and regardless of the issue, you're ready to get back to work. Pull up the sleeves and get down to it. And you've got a smile on your face. So it's amazing what can happen in a couple of days. You guys have got it down to a science. Now, you also do some report cards, and you do some continued analysis as to the makeup and the behavior, if you will, of a current Congress, don't you?
Yeah, we have our scorecard, our congressional scorecard, which I actually just updated this morning. Added in a few new votes. But it's at congress.freedomworks.org. And you can see scorecards going back, I think we go back to 2005, but we only started giving the awards out, what we call our Freedom Fighter Award, in 2011, I believe. And basically any member who scores 90% or higher gets a little award from us. It's a fist that's holding a copy of the Declaration of Independence in it. And we give those out to members, usually spring, summer. This year, we no joke, Pat, we shut down our office in DC on March 16th, and everybody's been teleworking ever since. Those awards arrived the Friday before we closed the office. So we just had gotten them in. We haven't even had a chance to schedule any sort of event or just general drop by to offices of members who won them. So we're gonna have to figure that out when we get back to Washington, D.C. and back in the office on a regular basis. But that scorecard is that thing's my baby. I make the sign off on all of the key votes, was what we call them, that we send to the Hill. We alert offices before we send a key vote out, or when we send a key vote out before a vote takes place, to let them know whether we're going to score yes or score no on a bill. If we don't send out a key vote on it, doesn't mean we won't score it. It's just not something that we consider necessarily as pressing. But obviously big bills like the $3 trillion bill that the House voted on right. Friday night, we scored no on that one. You have the USA Freedom Reauthorization Act, which had we scored no on that, and we actually weighted it heavily. We triple weighted it, which means it's going to the vote will count more towards a member's final score. We scored triple against that in the House. Over on the Senate side, we were able to affect the outcome. We actually got we got an amendment adopted that was sponsored by Senator Mike Lee and Senator Patrick Leahy. And that was included in the final bill. We decided to go neutral once we got that amendment adopted, so we didn't score against it in final passage in the Senate. But it's going back to the House, and probably I think they're going to vote on that on May 27th. When the House comes back in session, and we're trying to get one more amendment included in that we failed by one vote in the Senate. If we had any one of a few members who didn't make that vote there, it would have passed. So we were a little frustrated by that.
Are you talking about warrantless searches of the of folks' internet browsing?
That's correct. Yeah, that was the amendment offered by Senators Ron Wyden and Steve Daines. So we are trying to.
That was a hugely disappointing vote. There's a Senator Whitehouse here in Rhode Island who's a Democrat, and as a libertarian, I personally, given the fact that 2 guests ago on this show was Lynn Ulbricht, the mother of Ross Ulbricht, I am on a personal mission to, on a political level, make him reconsider his vote on that, because, and here's the frustrating part, so many folks drape themselves in the Constitution and the protection of the protection of civil rights, when yet when it comes to a fundamental moment like that, when they have the chance literally to change history, so often they buckle. And that, you see, that's the important part of an organization like yours. There's a tendency for Americans to just paint with a broad brush about individual, they'll call them lobbyists, and everybody's a lobbyist. But the problem is that there's vastly different approaches, there's vastly different styles, and there's vastly different issues. You have a city full of people who have been hired or hired guns for a variety of industries to work for the best financial interests of those industries. And I, as a libertarian, I don't necessarily say that's a bad thing. That's the free market. You know, you're lobbying for what is going to work for your business per se, as long as your pursuit is honorable and it's ethical. At the same time, organizations like yours are a direct reflection of a significant segment of the economy who are, again, when I look at your principles, it's smaller government, lower taxes, free markets, personal liberty, and the rule of law, everything you just described me is right in those lanes. And I can't imagine, particularly in the year 2020, in the age of COVID, the age of pandemic, and in the age of never let a good crisis go to waste, I can't imagine a single more honorable pursuit than your mission statement.
I mean, look, Pat, I mean, it's I go back home because I commute from Atlanta, Georgia, or near Atlanta, Georgia, to Washington, D.C. in a normal year, about 35 weeks out of the year, which this year has been anything but a normal year.
Right.
So I've been, with the exception of a short trip I did make to D.C. on Saturday, I drove home on Sunday. I've been pretty much in Atlanta since March 6th. But I tell people back home, my friends back home, they know I'm a lobbyist. I am a registered lobbyist. My client is FreedomWorks. But what I like to tell them is that I'm a good lobbyist. I fight to cut your taxes. I fight to cut regulation. I fight to cut, to reform, outdated and old and racially disparate sentencing laws and work on a number of other issues. Obviously civil liberties mentioned earlier. But I operate under certain confines. I mean, I operate under the First Amendment, that the right to redress grievances. So, I live under the banner of the First Amendment on a daily basis, that I have the right to go to my government through a collective group, and pardon the phrase collective, but a collective group of activists who have empowered me to go and basically tell the federal government, tell Congress when they're wrong or when they're right, just to try to get a bill across the finish line. So, and you talk about different styles. I mean, my style is unorthodox. This is my second career. For 10 years before I did this, I did insurance, life and health, mostly on the life side. Actually, almost exclusively on the life side. But my style is pretty laid back and straightforward. A couple staffers have told me that they appreciate my style because I'm pretty blunt and I save them time. I tell them where I'm at, pretty much when I walk in the room, and that's that. Have some conversation around that, and then see if we can move each other. And if we can move each other, great. If not, oh well. But I'm not the type of guy who goes in and starts screaming at people who aren't doing the right thing. I'll just basically ask them why they're wrong. That's pretty much that.
No, and in a very large way, your organization is far more effective as a representative of me as an American citizen than the very Congress to which that responsibility is purportedly attached to. You engage with people, you engage with your membership, you do a studied analysis of what the popular will is, and then meter that, if you will, with the intellectual or philosophical or economic issues underlying that particular issue. If quite frankly, if Congress took the same approach to it, the same thoughtful approach, we still wouldn't agree on anything, but I think at least the decisions we made would be at some level intellectually sound.
No, I agree. I mean, and look, for us, during COVID-19 is a good example of this. We've been doing weekly surveys of our activist community just to get a sense of where they are on, mandated government shutdowns, partial economic shutdowns, to see, to get a gauge of we're not asking them specific questions about their economic well-being, but have your hours been cut? Have you lost your job? We're trying to get a sense of where our activist community is on a regular basis, simply because it better informs us in what we need to do and the actions we need to take as an institution for our community, as well as how we're going to approach our conversations with members of Congress or legislative staff. I mean, one of the things we have tried very carefully not to do is to not get ahead of our activist community on issues, which is why you don't see us engaging on a lot of social issues. Criminal justice is probably the issue we've gone the furthest out on. And part of that's because, I mean, obviously the criminal justice system is so incredibly screwed up and it needs serious overhaul, both at the state and federal levels. I think a lot of people don't really understand the complexities of that issue, but that's the issue we've probably gone the furthest on. But we're very cautious inside the institution not to get too far ahead of the activist community on any issue, because we want to maintain our, the trust they have in us, as well as be viewed as a source of principle and integrity when you're dealing with us.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely.
So I mean, that's all vitally important to us.
Absolutely, and it reflects itself in your work every day. Let's get down to some issues now. Clearly, the COVID has altered, and I'm trying to think of polite words here. This is family internet radio. COVID has given a new perspective to the concept of fiscal responsibility, hasn't it? Not as a libertarian who is outraged by the level of deficits we had, I don't know, in a different planet, in a different world, in a different reality somewhere around February, and who was outraged at the government's, I call it stealth quantitative easing that took place in the fourth quarter, and what that had added to the deficit in effect to try and maintain market valuations. Now I look at this and have to wonder, have we in fact gone insane? Have we gone insane?
It's really hard, Pat, not to answer that with a yes. Certainly Congress has lost, many members of Congress have lost their minds. And look, I mean, you're right. The deficit in March, the Congressional Budget Office, which is like the official scorekeeper of spending in Congress, they score every piece of legislation almost every piece of legislation that comes through. Bills that are marked up by committee, bills that are going on the floor is what I mean by that. In March, they released the initial projection for the year is we were facing a $1 trillion budget deficit, about 4.5% of gross domestic product, which historically is not that. The $1 trillion is high, but the percentage of GDP, yeah, it's on the higher end, but it's not like what we were running during the Great Recession. The budget deficit at the peak of the Great Recession reached just under 9%. And that was with a $1.4 trillion budget deficit, I think, because we ran $4 trillion budget deficits 4 years in a row during the Great Recession. So the beginning of this year was $1 trillion, 4.5% of GDP. That was revised up in March to 1.073 trillion, and that was after the first phase of COVID-19 related legislation had passed Congress. And they did. I don't remember if they provided a deficit to GDP revision or not, but here we are now. It is May 19th, and the CBO is going to be releasing its updated budget forecast at the end of the year. They just released their updated economic forecast today. 38% decline in gross domestic product, which is depression level. Let's just be clear about that. But we had gotten some semblance without specific tables or long-term outlooks that we were facing a 17.9% deficit to GDP ratio this year, which would be the highest we've seen since 1945. And you got to think about what that means. I mean, that's the end of World War II. That was the largest, greatest conflict the United States had been involved in to that point, even probably to this point. And government spending as a percentage of GDP was probably in excess of 45%. It may have even been higher. I'd have to go back and look, but it was pretty high. And then our debt to GDP ratio this year. This is publicly held debt. The CBO doesn't include intergovernmental holdings in that number. Like when you see $24 trillion debt, that includes intergovernmental holdings. CBO only measures it by what the public owes. And the debt to GDP ratio, public debt to GDP ratio, is going to be 101%. Again, the largest debt to GDP ratio we've seen since World War II, the conclusion of World War II. The thing about that is the 10-year budget window on which CBO did its projections in January, had us at 101% of GDP in 2030. It is 2020 because of the increased spending as well as the related COVID-19 contraction in the economy. We're going to see what we were supposed to see 10 years from now today. And that's concerning. We're going to spend 30% of the economy this year. Congress will spend 30% of the economy this year just through government spending. And who know? And the biggest challenge we're going to face is, after all this is done, Pat, is whether the spending goes away. Because some of it, right, whenever we have a crisis, and I think you said it earlier, like never letting a crisis go to waste, there is going to be a push by some in Congress to keep around some of the spending, or at least some of it, not all of it, not every single, I think the government spending related response to COVID-19 has been somewhere in the neighborhood of $3.5 trillion. So we may not see that all that's not going to stick around, but some of it will if we don't push back on it. So you're going to see even higher deficits than what the CBO projected in January in the out years here. Our debt to GDP ratio in 2030 could be much higher than 101%.
Well, let's talk about moral hazards. 6 months ago, attempts by Bernie Sanders and his followers to legitimize $2 to $3 trillion worth of spending in terms of quote unquote Medicare for all and or free college tuition for all were scoffed at because of what was then considered the obscenity of their numbers. I'm talking about literally January, February, and to the point where there have folks have called for Bernie to come back into the race because of the new perspective, I think is the term I heard by one wag, the new perspective Americans have with regard to the legitimacy of printing trillions of dollars simply to become the social justice warriors of the ages. Yeah. How can we, if we were so quick to, and I'll take the airlines as a result. It's the prevalent marketing scheme for this period of time is that we're all in this together, and the airlines had launched upon that until somebody with probably about a bazillion Twitter followers said, "Yeah, we were all in this together until you decided to hit me with $75 in extra baggage fees." You had airlines that were printing money, and for a variety of reasons. Obviously, the economy was quote unquote booming. The travel and leisure travel as well as business travel was at an all-time high. Oil prices had a certain level. Met some level of equanimity. All of that was going on, and they were literally printing money. A month into COVID, we are now led to believe that, of course, Western civilization will absolutely crumble if I can't get a $1.99 Super Saver fare down to Jamaica, man. And so, yeah, people look at that and as they should with, I think, what's the term from the 19th century, with a jaundiced view. Yes. Yeah. I have an extremely jaundiced view. And these airlines are crying poverty, which speaks more to their inability to grasp the generally accepted accounting principle of retained earnings than it has to do with anything about their actual operating condition. Really? 3 weeks and you're bankrupt? My God. What are you, a fraternity brat from State U? It begs incredulity. That's all I can say.
The thing about Sanders. Look, I mean, well, let me start off with something that happened more recently. We were having a call with a congressman, a Republican congressman, very conservative Republican congressman, and he joked somewhat. It was like a half joke. I mean, he was that we're all kind of living in the world of modern monetary theory now, which is the AOC and Bernie Sanders take that we can just print money and not have to worry about the consequences of hyperinflation, which is a crock of crap, is what it is. But
right.
So there, the theory basically that Bernie Sanders should get back in the race because we can now suddenly afford all this stuff I think there's one thing there's one thing you got to understand. If I disagree with the approach Congress has taken, I disagree with the approach the Fed has taken to just basically inject trillions of dollars in the economy, not just through increased lending, but look, there's a difference between a theoretically one-off expenditure to deal with COVID-19, in terms of congressional response as well as Fed response. Then what Bernie Sanders wants is to have basically a doubling of the size of the federal budget for infinity, which is what he wants. So you could theoretically say, yeah, we can do this one time and get away with it with limited impact to the economy, with the asterisk there that this sets a terrible precedent for future responses to crises, than it is to, and then Sanders doing this every year. We can't, this is not, doing this year on year is not sustainable.
Right.
Not to say that doing it now is sustainable. So there's quite a difference between what Sanders wants and the response to COVID-19. And I'm not trying to justify the response to COVID-19. I'm simply saying that a one-off expenditure of the size we're seeing from the federal government is recoverable. It is not recoverable to spend $8 trillion a year, or however, like this year, the federal budget, like the final line item on the federal budget will probably be in somewhere in excess of $7.5 trillion. You can't do that every year. And because you'll be running your debt to GDP ratio will skyrocket above 200% in no time. Those levels, people will start to question the ability of you to pay back your debt.
Right.
And your interest rates will go up. Then private market interest rates will go up, and then we call it the crowd out effect. There will be fewer loanable dollars available and for lending. People won't be able to get a loan because they can't afford it. They can't afford the interest rate. So
and the Wall Street Journal just pointed out a day or so ago that it's already happening to essentially the bank for the lending bank for the third world, which is of course China. China now finds itself in an uncomfortable position of having to determine a political balance versus the fiscal realities of restructuring debt from every nation from Thailand on to Vietnam and literally everywhere in and around in between, Latin America, Central America. I mean, but should the government, God forbid, try to actually engage in an honest conversation about this? I get the exigent nature of the crisis and the one-off, but you and I are having this conversation. I'm sure knowledgeable, learned people in and around the Beltway are quietly having this conversation. But I keep getting back to the moral hazard issue because there is no sense of shared sacrifice anymore. And if we don't have this conversation with the nation, then again, your Bernie bro is going to be screaming for his, for killing his college loan. It's somewhere in a Facebook room right now. Somewhere it's happening.
This conversation reminds me of the famous quote from Frederick Hayek: "Is the curious task of economics is to demonstrate to men how little." I can't remember. I always forget the quote. Anyway, it's from I think Constitutional Liberty. But it's we think we can come up with all these different. Economists think they can go in and solve the world's problems based on spreadsheets and formulas. And I mean, you saw this during the 2008-2009 economic crisis. I mean, I was actually looking at this not too long ago. You remember the Romer chart that showed the line, the unemployment levels if we had a stimulus package and then one without. And obviously, the one without the stimulus package was a lot higher. Unemployment would have been a lot higher than if we had a stimulus package. I think they said it would peak out at just under 8% if we had a stimulus package. Of course, we got the Congress got a stimulus package. It costs $800 billion, ballparking. I don't remember the exact amount. I think it was like 838 or something like that. And then unemployment peaked at 10% in like October of 2010. a year and a half after it was passed. Maybe it was October 2009. I don't remember which. But so you're telling me, like, you had all this money, you basically borrowed all this money for these quote unquote shovel ready jobs, and it didn't work, or it worked to a limited effect. The best way, you're talking about getting the economy going again, and the best way to speed up our recovery here is to get the government the hell out of the way. Now, I'm not saying we should come in and cut taxes, because, like, and I'm usually the last person to say that, or the first person to say we should cut taxes. Mm-hmm. But in a situation like this, when our budget deficits are going to be so high, I'm a little uncomfortable with cutting taxes. I think the projection I saw from someone the other day, and this wasn't CBO, I think it was Brian Riddell at the Manhattan Institute. He thinks we're not going to have. He thinks tax revenues as a percentage of GDP this year are going to be under 10%, which is shockingly low. It's usually about 16.5% to 17%. Mm-hmm. And that just gives you an idea of the scale of the impact of this crisis. But you can cut regulation, and you can start cutting spending. And I'm not talking about massive spending cuts. I'm talking about, like, let's shave a few percentage points away, and not keep all this other spending around, but let's cut some spending to help get the government out of the way, because the more we spend, the more debt that's going to have to be created, the more people are going to question whether we can repay back that debt, and it's going to make borrowing on the private market more intensive. And Trump did do something today, and I know we all have our opinions on our dear leader, but he did issue an executive order today urging agency heads to begin rolling back regulations that are impediments to business, because he wants to see the recovery take hold. And that's a good EO. That sort of thing, doubling down on the biggest success of this administration, which has been the deregulatory agenda, is the way to go. Deregulate. Absolutely. Get the government out of the way, and allow people to innovate, create, and show that spirit of entrepreneurship, because that's what's made America the envy of the world. That's what's made us an economic superpower, is our ability to innovate, create, and be entrepreneurs. So let's double down on. Let's go back to that. Let's see what we can do with the economy under those circumstances.
And what's fascinating, and I think one of the most interesting, ironic, and even funniest bureaucratic rollbacks, of course, and it's happened virtually everywhere, is the sudden ability to order a couple of drinks with dinner and take them home. And imagine just 3 short months ago, if you had suggested seriously down in Atlanta or New Orleans, if you had gone there and said, you know what, this whole takeout drink thing is a really good idea, that shows folks the willingness of innovators in difficult times to try and stretch for everything, and it also shows how ridiculous most of our laws are. But here's my concern, and then I want to dive right into Ms. Pelosi's latest madness. I'm old enough now, I can say those words, to remember the savings and loan scandal. I remember Keating and some young senator who was fresh out of the Hanoi Hilton, who was in all sorts of trouble over that. I'm old enough to remember Enron. I'm old enough to remember, the tech bubble. I'm old enough to remember 2008 and the collapse of because of the home loans. I'm old enough now to be involved in COVID. And the trend, if I can just leave this part of the conversation with an explanation point, is that if you look at bubble to bubble to bubble to bubble to bubble, the pathology is the same. All that seems to increase almost exponentially is the size. And yet we've managed every time somehow to dodge the bullet and not run into hyperinflation, which I believe has created this artificial sense of security amongst our alleged leadership that somehow we are the Teflon economy and we can continue to engage in these travesties, ignore the most fundamental economics. I question if a significant number of Congress was drunk freshman year, first semester, when they had to take Danielson or Samuelson or one of the economic tomes, because they seem to be incapable. We're not talking about challenging issues here at any of these levels. So, every time the stakes keep getting higher and higher, and we're playing chicken. And at what point in time do we lose that game?
And Pat, I wish I had a good answer for you. I mean, I was talking to a member of Congress, a Republican member of Congress, conservative member of Congress, and we were talking about like when are we going to hit the brick wall?
Right.
When are we going to know when we're hitting a sovereign debt crisis on scale of Greece or France or whatever the case may be?
Right. Very much so.
And he said he was talking to the head of another prominent DC organization that works on a lot of budgetary issues, and it's going to be we're not going to know it until it happens. That's the thing. And Paul Ryan was a very flawed member, but he reminds me a lot of Ronald Reagan in the sense that he was very good rhetorically, but the action, like Paul Ryan in action, wasn't always on point, especially as speaker. But Paul Ryan once said, "This is the most predictable crisis the United States has ever faced, which is our looming fiscal crisis, and we got to start getting a handle on it now." Pat, the issue before COVID hit, Congress gets into. Massey talks about this a lot, and I love when Thomas Massey talks about it, because he talks about how these budget bills that Congress has passed every year or two, going back to like 2013, these caps bills, they were like these $1 trillion bills, trillion to 1 trillion to 1.4 trillion. The most recent was like 1.4, I think, that only deal with discretionary spending. And if anybody who's listening knows anything about federal budget policy, discretionary spending is about 30% of the federal budget. That's it. That's what Congress gets in these caps deals and these fights about over spending caps. Is 30% of the budget. The rest of the budget is on autopilot. Congress doesn't appropriate it. We break them down into two different things. One of those is direct spending, or otherwise known as mandatory spending, which is federal pensions, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, a few other things here, veterans benefits, a few other things here and there. And the other is the interest on the national debt. Within the next few years, and this is again before COVID-19, within the next few years, interest on the national debt was going to actually outpace defense discretionary spending.
Wow.
That's how serious the problem's becoming. We're talking about like that's within the next 10 years. That was supposed to happen. It may happen sooner now. But that's the size of the crisis we're facing, and there are way too many members of Congress who do not care. They're going to kick the can down the road as long as they want to. There are very few members of Congress who you talk to who see this coming, who see this like it's a train coming right for us, right down the tracks. We're standing on the tracks and we just refuse to move. We keep denying it's there. But it's going to hit us one day. It's going to hit us hard. And, we're going to be wheeling, wheelbarrows of money that doesn't need anything down the street to the grocery store to pay for something. That's what we're staring at, and too few care. And I can tell you that personally. I talk to these members.
Is it short-term? When I say greed, I don't mean personal greed, personal avarice. I mean short-term political greed that motivates them to continue on this?
Yeah, that's exactly it. There's I haven't read this in a while, but I own it. And I think it's in my office in DC. I think it's the Confessions of Congressman X. And it was apparently written by a Democrat, but nobody, I don't know, it was anonymously written.
That sounds like Pornhub.
But it sheds a lot of really good insight on the thinking of a member of Congress who knows the problems we face, but refuses to do anything about them because of special interest groups, because of that's it. I mean, it was, you can probably find it on Amazon for $10. If you can find it on Amazon, get it, because it's a good read. It shows you the mind of a member, especially a member who's not a conservative. But yeah, I mean, look, I mean, I've talked to members. The budget deals that got passed in 18 and 19, the one thing we kept being told by Republican leadership offices, was that's nobody, like, they don't hear anything about spending anymore. That's why they're not going to do anything on it. They said, like, the grassroots activists don't care about spending anymore. Just like, and we kept telling, we would, anytime we had the opportunity, we would tell our activists, like, spending is very much still an issue. Like, we understand we have a Republican president, but the deficit keeps going up. And the deficit kept going. I mean, the deficit in 17, the deficit in 18 just kept creeping up. And we kept getting these bad budget deals that were getting signed into law, that were increasing discretionary spending on top of the automatic increases in mandatory spending and interest on the national debt. Like, we knew this problem was there. We have known this problem was there. You can go talk to the members who you can talk to about the debt and deficit, who know it's a problem. Andy Biggs, Warren Davidson, Thomas Massey, Jim Jordan, Tom McClintock. Those guys know it. Mike Lee, Rand Paul, Steve Daines, Pat Toomey. They know it. But they're only a handful of guys. And there are 535 members of Congress, about 20 of whom are actually willing to do something about this. That's the state of how screwed we are.
We have a saying where I come from in the streets of Jersey: denial ain't a river in Egypt. And sadly, there's a lot of that going around. Folks, if you're just joining us, Jason Pai of FreedomWorks is joining us and can be found at freedomworks.org. He's the Vice President of Legislative Affairs. He presides over policy and legislative analysis for FreedomWorks. I always love to read the mission statement per se, but ultimately the mission of FreedomWorks is to build, educate, and mobilize the largest network of activists advocating the principles of smaller government, lower taxes, free markets, personal liberty, and the rule of law. Again, full disclosure, I had the opportunity to spend a few days at FreedomWorks last year in a life-affirming experience. I was allowed, informed, to roam the halls of Congress, terrorizing, if you will, legislative staffers everywhere. Jason, let's get down. You've spent a lot of time here, but I still want to cover the madness of Ms. Pelosi, if you will. We responded to the immediate crisis as a nation. It was unusually bipartisan, if you will, in pumping money into the economy instantly, so we would have brighter brights and whiter whites, and new and improved, and somehow this would hold things together. There was, of course, associated with the normal chaos, fear and loathing. You know, we were treated to the spectacle of the Los Angeles Lakers being bailed out. Okay, the nuttiness that presides sometimes serves as what I call outrage porn, which is a distraction away from the more salient, more important issues. And the issue was, of course, was this to be the only bailout? You know, we have literally created an employment situation where in parts of America it is significantly more profitable right now to be furloughed, to be on unemployment, and to go to bed every night praying to whoever you pray to that you don't get called back to work. Talk about unanticipated side effects. Yikes. So now set the stage, because we've got two things going on simultaneously. We've got the continuing analysis of the quote-unquote Patriot Act and all of its surroundings. And then we've also got, COVID, I don't even know what you call it anymore, COVID equalization, COVID cat, whatever. They're talking about how much money now?
The bill that the House voted on Friday was estimated to be $3 trillion. And I don't think that has come out of the CBO. I think that's just what the media was speculating. I haven't seen the CBO score for that bill yet. But $1 trillion, actually just under $1 trillion of that, was funding for states, because to bail them out of these revenue crises that they have put themselves in. And then there were, expansion. It was an extension of unemployment benefits, which you mentioned, which you're absolutely right about. That's going to incentivize people to stay on unemployment rather than go seek work. We're already seeing that happen. And there was also another round of quote unquote stimulus checks, which have no aggregate impact on the economy whatsoever. I've written about that before. I wrote about the 2001 or 2002 rebate checks, and then the ones that also happened in 2007 or 2008. And you see rises in personal income, but you don't see increases in consumption, or if maybe a marginal increase, but nothing on par with the increase in disposable income. So yeah, I mean, that was, and there were other things in that bill as well. I mean, there were things that were completely unrelated to COVID-19 that had no business being in that bill, like the Safe Banking Act, which deals with cannabis policy and allowing these businesses that are legal in some states to operate in financial institutions. FreedomWorks doesn't take positions on those issues. Personally, I have no problem with the Safe Banking Act, but like, should it have been in that bill? Nah, probably not. It sends the wrong message. And it gave Republicans a convenient talking point. They went out there and said cannabis is mentioned more time in this bill than jobs or employment or anything like that. The bill the good news about the bill is it's dead. It's not going anywhere in the Senate. The bad news is there are still discussions about a fourth phase of a response to COVID-19, which will probably include some measure of bailout money for state and local governments. The problem with that, Pat, as I'm sure someone as astute as you has realized, is that they're creating a perverse incentive, because the concern is right now we're going to see a W. Like, we're coming out of this. We're going to go back up here. It's not going to be a V. It's going to be another W, because we'll have another round of shutdowns and partial shutdowns in the fall, as if this comes back, in the likely event that comes back. So if we bail out governors, they're going to do this again. Partially shut down their economies. They're going to lose billions of dollars in revenue as a result of that. And they're going to do what they did the last time again, which is to come back to Congress and beg for more money. Another handout to bail them out, to save them from the revenue losses they were going to have, so they don't have to cut, services or anything like that. That's what we're looking at. So that's the incentive that's being created. We've also seen some other crazy things proposed, and Steve Moore and I actually have a paper coming out about this tomorrow, I hope.
Please share that with me, by the way.
Oh, it definitely will. It's on the back end of the website right now. I just got to hit publish on it, and hopefully I will hit publish first thing in the morning. But basically, this what they're proposing, and this is coming from, oddly enough, a Republican senator from Missouri by the name of Josh Hawley, who I loathe, by the way. He's bad on just about every one of our issues. He's proposing that the federal government, rather than do the Paycheck Protection Program, which is the loans they can get from the Small Business Administration, from financial institutions that are backed by the Small Business Administration. So if you, rather than these people going on unemployment or being furloughed, which they can get unemployment if they're furloughed, the federal government will subsidize those salaries, 80% of those salaries. And then Pramila Jayapal, who's a Democrat from Washington, she also has a similar bill in the House, but hers would subsidize 100% of salaries. So that's the extent to which some Republicans are going, in the name, and specifically Josh Hawley, to have the federal government intervene, and that also will create the same perverse incentive that shutting down or bailing out states will have as well. I mean, governments will say, well, the federal government's going to pick up these salaries, so I don't really have to worry about shutting down my state's economy. I'm going to get the funding for the tax revenues I'm losing from the federal government, and their wages will be paid by the federal government. In the paper, we estimate this would cost the federal government anywhere between $1 trillion to $2 trillion. Josh Hawley's proposal. So that's some of the stupid ideas we're seeing, and there is going to be a phase 4. We just don't know what it looks like yet. But we know state and local funding will be a part of it, possibly a liability shield for businesses, which we actually do support, protecting businesses that reopen from lawsuits from consumers or employees, provided they take certain steps to provide a safe workplace, as safe as they can. But those are the things we're seeing. So that's the state of play right now. Everything is terrible, as I like to say. but the libertarian in me refuses to give up. So,
let's look at that for a second. Since the dawn of time, I'm going to go back all the way to the Clinton administration, so many years ago, and I lived somehow.
The government is over.
All right, the year of, remember, midnight basketball, and of course, one of the most popular aspects was the funding, if you will, of police departments. Except, like most legislation of its ilk, there was a sunset provision. So as time went on, people began to question what happens when all of a sudden the funding for these police officers go away. Well, by and large, those police officers go away. So now let's extrapolate that. Let's blow that up, and let's do it for everybody. And so the problem is, whether you're in a venture capital environment and you're funding a new business, or in this case in government and trying to sustain businesses, when you redirect the priorities of business so that they are focused entirely on the generation of employment, as opposed to actually trying to allow businesses simply to exist at some level so they can focus on what their true role is, which is the delivery of product and the development of product, you completely skew the enterprise and you are doomed for failure. It's insulting the normal attempts to interfere in private markets by, giving out loans or bonding debt and creating TIF enterprise style zones where you redirect taxation and yada, 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 or in the words of the great Charlie Brown, wah, 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 wah. But now you've got businesses essentially refocusing the entire purpose of business in and of itself, which is to say that the role of business is to create employment. I can't think of anything more moronic and stupid even than that. Yeah. Is anybody up there cognizant of not even the long-term damage, the medium-term, almost the initial damage that will do to businesses?
The same as you're looking at the same issue as budget and spending. Few members are up there. I mean, there are business owners. There are guys who are business owners who do understand it. Your Ralph Normans, for example, your Thomas Massey's, your Steve Daines, who do understand that increased government intervention in the economy is, especially on this scale, is going to have a negative impact.
Right.
But no, I mean, for 80%, 85% of members, Republican or Democrat, typically Democrat, but also many Republicans, too many. The first thing they can think of when there's a crisis is we need a government program. And to some degree, and I mean, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. I mean, this strain of populism that has kind of infected the conservative movement, the same way COVID-19 has infected the United States. It's a cancer. And these guys, like this national conservatism, this idea of putting, what they seem to want to do is put the entire middle class on welfare. That's the challenge that that I think both conservatives, actual conservatives, and libertarians face. Is years ago, and if I could leave your show tonight with anything, it's probably this. In my experiences working inside Congress with members and staff, is that the things that libertarians and fiscal conservatives agree on are far greater than the things we disagree on, and it's not even close. And yet the prospect of fusionism has largely gone away because of frustration over bathroom bills or abortion or same-sex marriage or immigration. And some of those issues are more important than others. And but the sort of cultural conservatism. I'm not a cultural conservative. I'm a dyed-in-the-wool libertarian with everything that comes with that, including my views on immigration. My views on immigration, not FreedomWorks views on immigration.
Right. Absolutely.
you know, it's we've got to refine that. We've got to find that common ground again, and actually start working towards something. It doesn't mean that small L libertarians have to vote for Republicans all the time. I'm not suggesting that. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is we got to find those areas of common ground we agree on and work together. Because if we don't start working together, if philosophical libertarians like myself or yourself or anybody else who's listening to this, just say, just they want to throw this away, throw that idea of that concept of fusionism away, it's going to be for the detriment of the country. Because and I understand it, and doesn't mean you can't work with progressives on issues that matter. I mean, we work with one of my two of my closest friends in DC politics are progressives. We disagree. One of them, he and I disagree on he doesn't really, I don't think he really cares about economics. He's more of like civil liberties minded.
Right.
The other one does care very much about the fiscal policy and economic policy, and she and I disagree. We refuse to talk about those issues when we're in the same room. We mostly talk about her and her boyfriend have cats. My wife and I have cats. That's typically what we talk about. But no, I mean, you can find areas of common ground, and for the latter person I was talking about is criminal justice. Find areas of common ground and work on those areas. I'm not saying you can't, but like with conservatives, with fiscal conservatives, with your Andy Biggs and your Pat Toomey's and your Mike Lee's and Jim Jordan's and a few others, we do have more areas of common ground than we don't, and we need to be working together when we can, where we can, to get those to raise awareness of those issues and hopefully find some sort of legislative or administrative remedy for them. That's the only hope we have. And if we give up on the concept of fusionism, we're not going to go very far.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because the reason why this show is called The Coalition is that 7 years ago, seemingly a lifetime ago, when in a far simpler time, when we get mortally wounded by the notion of, say, a baseball team coming in and trying to build a stadium on the public dime, which, by the way, in Rhode Island we beat twice. That's why they're called the Worcester Red Sox now. Trivia. That would render us catatonic with rage, if you will. Nowadays, everything's exploded. We call it the coalition because we ultimately look to progressives. We look to fiscally conservative Republicans. We look to libertarians and try and find commonality and focus on those issues. Because as I like to say, when we fixed all of that in 20 or 30 years, then we can get pissed off at each other again and argue about the other stuff. The challenge is when it comes to fusionism, I find it easier, incredibly enough, to have a conversation with a progressive about issues like immigration, issues surrounding corporatism and cronyism and corporate welfare, than it is to have these kind of conversations, because the challenge seems to be, maybe this is a little bit of saying, it's not our fault, they did it first, but that movement is rife. Not some of the people you mentioned, but that movement is rife with so many folks who are so terrible on the war on drugs and on immigration and on the Fourth Amendment, just so outrageously bad, that it's easier to find common ground with a progressive, if you're a libertarian, than it is with someone who is a populist / cultural conservative / Republican. And that you're absolutely, I know. Yeah. It's tough because it's hard to maintain those silos. That's probably the biggest challenge. Because
no, it is. I mean,
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, but I mean, it's because simultaneously this week we had the opportunity, as you brought up at the beginning of the show, the notion that one more vote, and again, I'm a. Are you familiar? You're familiar with the case of Ross Ulbricht, right?
Yeah, I know his mother, Lynn. Yeah,
right. Lynn was on the show 2 days ago. It was her third appearance. If you look at the email I sent you, on every email I send out, my hashtag, everybody's got a hashtag, right? Because hashtags are going to change the world. But my hashtag is Free Ross. And the reason I put the hashtag on there, not because out of some virtue signaling, but I can't tell you how many times people have actually brought up in a phone conversation, who's Ross? And why should we free him? And then it stimulates a conversation, which in some cases will stimulate a a reaction and maybe a signature signing. And on the rare case, it actually stimulates a phone call to the Free Ross people or to Ms. Ulbrich or any of those things. That's why we do it. But when you look at situations like that and how important that one extra vote was to get folks out of our shorts, if you will, with regard to warrantless searches of immensely private information. I mean, one of the great movies of this past year or so, of course, was that elegant film noir called, what was it, Suicide Squad? And what does the one guy say as he's about to he might be getting offed by one of the Suicide Squad? If they kill me, clear my browser. I mean, that's one of the great statements for the ages. All right. So, but on a serious note, it's hard for me as a hardcore radical libertarian to sit down with the folks who effectively are finding new ways to create more Ross Ulbrichts if they had the chance to have a conversation about economics. It's hard, man. It's really hard.
No, I know. I mean, I'm probably shouldn't. So no, one of my closest friends on the Hill is Congressman Andy Biggs, and Andy and I play in his band. He has a cover band. We play twice a year, once in DC, once in Arizona. Unfortunately, we didn't get our Arizona show this year. It was supposed to happen about 3 weeks ago, and
who do you guys cover?
We cover everything from Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers to because he's from Arizona, we cover a couple Arizona bands, the Gin Blossoms, Jimmy Eat World, which I grew up on Jimmy Eat World.
Right.
So
yep, absolutely.
Not the stuff they play on the radio, more their earlier stuff, but we do play the middle Jimmy Eat World. We play some Allman Brothers. There's one Eagles song we work in. A few things here and there, but Congressman Biggs and I I respect him highly. He is a good friend. His family, I've gotten to know his family really well. His both of his daughters, or actually two of his daughters, are in the band with us. One plays guitar and sings, the other just sings. And his wife is just so sweet. But he and I we disagree on a little bit, and those disagreements sometimes, he asked me why he didn't get 100% score in 2018, and I said, well, you would have had one had you voted for the First Step Act. That was, and I said, I told him, I was like, I'll be honest with you, Andy, that would stung a little. I was like, that bill was 38% of my lobbying activity in 2018, 55% of it in the last 6 months of the year. Mm-hmm. I worked on that bill. I worked on that bill hard, and he voted against me, and but you can't, the thing is, you can't let those disagreements define your relationships with someone.
Right.
And that's certainly, another example, I don't really know her that well, but I've met her a couple times, is Lisa Blunt Rochester from Delaware. Disagree with her on way more than I agree with her, but I'll tell you what, she is a very sweet and nice lady, and I enjoyed the couple conversations I've had with her. Those are the types of, Paul Ryan, I disagree with him on a lot, especially when he was speaker. But while he was speaker, I had during Tax Cuts and Jobs Act at the end of 2017, went into the speaker suite and sat down with him, and he did an activist call with us. It was just, and his staff walked out of the room. It was just me and him just sitting there, and we chatted for about 15 minutes before the call got started. He's, disagree with him on a lot. Incredibly nice guy. You got to learn to separate and I'm not saying this to you, I'm just saying this broadly to people who are listening. You can disagree on politics. Hell, I don't agree with my wife on everything, but you can't let those disagreements define your relationships with people. So, sometimes those people do make it very hard. Josh Hawley, who I mentioned before, is one of those people who make it very hard. I've never met the man. I just see the BS that comes out of his office or on his Twitter account from time to time. So much so I had to mute him recently. But yeah, like on Twitter. But that's one of those types of people who's just like, yeah, I don't know what you're trying to do here. But like all you're doing is making it harder. You're making it impossible for our office for us to work with your office on anything because you come across crazy. But you got to identify the people. You got to identify the people you can work with, even if you have disagreements with them, and just not let your disagreements define you. And I'd say, Pat, the most I've gotten out of my job, I get a lot out of my job on a daily basis, from my interactions with activists to just getting to sit down and read a piece of legislation, to doing the insane amount of writing that I do on a daily basis, to the dealings with my staff and training them and teaching them what I know. And I have 4 great staffers, Josh, Sarah, Dan, and Luke. And we'll treat them like family almost. But so I get a lot out of my job. But the one thing I get out of my job that's been the best is the bipartisan wins. Because in a town that's defined by partisanship, it's nice to actually come together with people across the ideological spectrum to get something done. And that happened on First Step. That happened on the Lee-Leahy amendment, and hopefully the Daines-Wyden amendment.
And ultimately, of course, you're right. And for the ideologues, as we, having a conversation late night with a libertarian it's almost analogous to the kind of conversations you had in college. They're funny, they're personal, they're intense. We're all true believers, and we have that ability for at least that time to work in the rarefied world of what needs to be and what has to be, as opposed to what could be or what should be or what even might be. And that's a difference, of course, about being legislating, if you will, when you're an activist, rabble-rousing, as opposed to when you finally make it into the inside and realize that, the Mr. Smith goes to Washington moment are few and far between. They just are. Yeah. In fact, they don't ever happen, really.
Which fly-in were you at? Were you at the one at the end of the year, or the one late last year, or the one at the beginning of the year?
I think it was late. It was. You had 2 back-to-back. In fact, it's funny because you had a couple of Rhode Island libertarians. You had me, and then you had a gentleman named Billy Hunt, who is a great candidate for state legislature here. And so it was very much. It was a spectacular weather, and again we had the run of the Capitol building, and we had our chaperones.
Of course.
So no one got out of control. There are a few wrist slaps, I think, but
the reason I ask, I remember during one of those fly-ins, there were a couple of activists from Illinois, and they were going to go visit Durbin's office. I was like, all right, but if you visit Durbin's office, actually it was Pennsylvania. We had activists from Pennsylvania and Illinois, and I said, if you go visit these offices, we do occasionally do some work with Durbin's office, and we do occasionally do some work with Casey's office. So, say what you got to say, but please be respectful, because we have to maintain those relationships. So
well, and what became obvious, if you were paying attention, and if anyone in this audience ever has a chance to go on one of these trips, you must do whatever you have to do, but you must, is that the TV lights are off, and what you've got is a building full of people trying to figure it out, and most of your interaction is going to be with staff members. And the staff members, I remember the conversations I had with people. And it's interesting because, I'm in my 50s. And I typically open it up with, I get it. And this was, folks, we were talking about, again, price fixing on prescription medicine. I said, who doesn't want to have lower prescription medical prices, particularly if you are a senior citizen or you've got a senior citizen in your family, your grandma, your grandpa. We get it. And I'm no genius at this. I was kind of winging it, but just simply by acknowledging the common ground is that we were all trying to figure it out, and we're all trying to come up with, and the TV lights were off, and it was a bunch of people in a room with a couple of soft drinks and an urgent desire for everybody to be wonks for a moment at a high level. Yeah. And we're all channeling our we've all been in the movies where, you're cutting the deals, and there's a little bit of fantasy baseball act. And that's probably what I'd call it. If you're a wonk, if you're a policy guy, if you're a politician, if you're an activist, going to your thing, there's an element of fantasy baseball to it. Because all of a sudden you're having conversations with, high-level congressional staffers in some case, because the first thing you do is you go to your own home congressional office, and they got to be nice. They got to pay attention, because, damn it, you're from, you're from the same town. You're going to see each other at the same coffee shop. I'm sorry,
you have to tell me how that works, because the one time I went to my my actual congressman's office, they basically were like, "Why are you here?"
No, listen, to their eternal credit, the staff at David Cicilline's office was very, very professional, and they sat down with us and they heard us out. It was exactly how it should be.
Yeah.
But once if you go in there with an attitude that you're going to rip them up, again, you're dealing with the staffers are the ones that's the lifeline, if you will, of Congress, is the congressional staff. So that's what you realize very quickly, that you've got this sort of, it's almost like a weekend at Bernie's aspect. They pull out the congressman, he does the votes, he makes quote unquote the decisions, but the staffers, and very often it's young staffers, are the ones who are really making things work. They are the duct tape. They are the nurses, if you will, of Congress. And once you realize that all they're looking for is the same thing you are, which is a solution in a conversation in a respectful environment, you realize that, yes, if you stick to it and you work with people, you can make things happen.
You're right. You're right.
So that's why I enjoy so much of what you do, and I'm a homer. Yeah, I'm a fanboy. Call me that. That's fine. And that's why we're blessed here at the coalition. Again, the point of the coalition is to bring people together. Is that we've got about a dozen or so national and regional groups who are willing to take time from their day, folks like you who have got a lot of things on your plate, and we are eternally grateful that you're willing to have these kind of conversations with us, because it changes your outlook, and it gives you a roadmap, and it's instructive, and you understand what the real obstacles are, and you realize how much nonsense there is on every side of the cable TV aisles, and it gives you a perspective. And that's what we're trying to accomplish here, which is, why we'd love to have you on, or whichever of your staff makes sense on a given issue on a regular basis, because of that rare insight that you all provide us. It's wonderful stuff. It's very, very helpful on so many different levels.
Well, Pat, as we say in the South, happy to oblige. So anytime we do things on my staff by issue. So if it's a specific issue you want to talk about, we probably have a staffer dedicated to it. So I know you mentioned you had Dan on at some point, Dan Savickas, but we have Sarah, we have Luke, we have Josh, and I'd love to throw Luke on here and see how he does. He's never really done a lot of media, so it'd be fun.
Sarah was my chaperone, by the way, if I remember correctly.
Oh, Sarah was,
and she was.
She's also my chaperone. So there's that.
I got that sense that she had the I think the term is the adult in the room.
She's quite impressive. At the time you would have come through, she was 23. She just turned 24, and she acts like she's 40. So it's she keeps me in line and makes sure I get the stuff I need to get done. She's my immediate deputy. Since about sometime last year, I made her my deputy. So she keeps the trains running on time, as we say. So she's great. And you had a good chaperone if you had her. You would have had a terrible one in me.
Well, but to the point, when you walked into the offices that she had done work with, there was an immediate acknowledgement from people who spiritually might not be normally on your side, that, okay, here was someone we respect, and here is someone we could sit down and work with. And for all the times when you want to put on your ammo on your camis and your ammo belt, and what's the eternal line? From the moment when the Germans attacked Pearl Harbor, let's go. You want to do that, but that's not what works. And it's all about if you're there to make a point or if you're there to get something done. And I would say to people that if you want to learn how to get things done and actually accomplish, there's so many folks in our movements, our respective various wings of the Liberty movement, who want to have what I call a we showed them moment. We showed them. We didn't win a damn thing, but we showed them. And that's the crap that's got to stop.
No, so. I mean, that's the biggest problem. I think part of this, and I actually got to go here in a minute. My wife wants me to take her to dinner. My We just
you can do that where you live. Yeah, I was gonna say you can do that where you live.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's actually our favorite restaurant just is reopening literally today. But we went to our first restaurant about 3.5 weeks ago. And it was we went to a Chili's in our neighboring town and had a sit down meal, and we dined in, and we were like, okay, like that we haven't done this in weeks, 2 months, and like it was nice to actually go to a restaurant again and be waited on. But no, I think one of the reasons things have become so toxic and so bitter in Washington, D.C., and this is just a theory I have, is just because the process in Washington, D.C. has become so centered around congressional leadership. It's rank and file members don't get there's not a lot of collaboration anymore. Everything's so centralized inside the speaker's office, majority leader, and then the minority leader. Not between between those offices when it comes to like appropriations bills and things like that, but they very much create the us versus them mentality that people see on C-SPAN every day. And I think that's a direct result of just this consolidation of power and this sort of disenfranchising of your regular rank and file member. The problem is the rank and file say they want the committee process to work, they want the legislative process to work as it was intended, but they're not willing to fight for it. That's where it gets a little tricky, but that's a topic. I actually could go on for hours about that topic. Just generally how the executive branch has claimed so much more power than it was intended to have, and it's in a lot of ways a direct result of Congress just kicking the ball over to the executive branch. But that's, like I said, I could go on that one for hours.
And there might be a show just in that. Well, listen, again, thank you, Jason Pye, for joining us. He is, of course, the Grand Poobah, the Chief Water Buffalo, the high exalted ruler, if you will, of all things legislative at FreedomWorks in Washington, D.C. But again, I had the opportunity to spend time there. I'm so grateful for the conversation, because this is exactly what this show is trying to accomplish. Thanks for joining us. We'll be in touch, and let's like I said, let's make this kind of a regular date for you and your folks to get an opportunity to reach deep into New England here and sort of spread the love. All right, buddy?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Pat. I appreciate it.
All right. A big thanks again to Jason. We're going to take a very quick break right now. In just a few minutes, Dr. Luis, as we say, is going to be joining us. He's going to be talking about community health care and the issues surrounding COVID here in the greater Providence, Rhode Island's Boston corridor. We are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage-born free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Radio Network, coalitionradionetwork.com, facebook.com/the Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and of course the mothership at coalitionradionetwork.com, as well as our older site, which we'll have a link to soon, covering literally nearly 8 years of work, interviews, conversations, challenges, arguments, heartbreaks at coalitionradio.us. Folks, stay tuned. We'll be right back.